Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Nonsense Retrospective. Now you may be wondering why you're hearing my voice instead of Rick's. Well, the unfortunate reality is Rick is ill. Now for those of you who follow all three podcasts we do, this may be peeling back the curtain a little bit, as obviously he was ill a couple of weeks ago, but that's in the timeline. You've probably had retrospectives and reviews since then where he's been perfectly fine, but yeah, that's just the nature of our recording. We record these in advance, so yeah, you could probably tell what episode of the review I recorded today based on the fact that I'm doing this solo, and it's unfortunate, but not to worry, Rick will be back next week. I'm confident in that, at least. If not, oops, I'm a big old liar. In today's episode of the retrospective, we are going to be discussing something that I care quite a lot about, but I'm pretty sure Rick knows dick all about, and that is the wonderful world of Spyro, or should I say specifically the original trilogy of Spyro games. The Spyro games that were so good they warranted a remaster, or reignited, shall we say, a reignition. But those familiar with the podcast know that we like to start the podcast with a fun little segment that Rick calls Nonsense Asinine Hypotheticals. Yes. Rick's not here, and it'd be a bit weird for me to come up with a hypothetical question for myself. So yesterday I googled a bunch of questions and I picked one that's not too shit. Okay, so the question I found was, would you sign up to be a colonist of another planet if it meant you would never be able to return to Earth? Now this hypothetical question's interesting because depending on what type of person you are will greatly influence your answer. My answer's pretty simple. No, I don't want to die on another planet for the sake of colonization. You can get fucked. I can totally understand the appeal. You want to be a pioneer, you want to be one of the first, you want to settle a planet, your name will go down in history on that planet. It also kind of depends as well, because it depends how much of an attachment you've got to Earth, as both a planet and your actual attachments. A lot of people might see Earth as, this is just where I happen to live, who cares? But other people are like, no, this is my planet, we should take better care of it and make sure it's up to snuff before colonizing other stuff. And as I'm saying about your own personal attachments, your answer might also change depending on, hey, are all your family and friends going to be a colonist and be going off with you? If the answer's yes, then chances are you're going to be like, well, I've got no one left on Earth now, so I might as well go with them, you know? On a personal level, I'd rather stay on Earth. Good old Earth. Good hypothetical, really. I'd be kind of interested to see what Rick's answer will be, so maybe it'll pop up on another episode of Retrospective with me ambushing Rick. So, as mentioned before, we are discussing the wonderful world of Spyro the Dragon today. Yes. Usually we like to start with our previous experience, and usually Rick takes the helm, but alas, you're stuck with me. So, my previous experience was, when I was younger, the way we'd experience most video games was via this beautiful invention called the demo disc. You'd pay about £5 for a magazine, which was expensive back then, let me fucking tell you, and it came with a free demo disc which would have demos for usually about 20 games, but it felt like hundreds when you were a child. These demos would usually be one or two levels, or maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, but the general gist is it will give you a general feel of the game, so you could try the game before you went out and spent your hard-earned pocket money. So the demo I played was a demo for Spyro the Year of the Dragon, which is the third of the trilogy. It had two levels on it. It had the Seashell Shores level and the Molten Crater level, which interestingly enough are both levels that you have to unlock in the first game by collecting X amount of eggs. So yeah, I was a bit surprised when, oh, I want to play those levels again, they're so fun, blah blah blah. Oh, you need 14 dragon eggs to unlock both of them. It's like, fuck. They also had access to the first skateboarding level in... Actually, was it the first? It might have been the skateboarding level in the altar place. I forget the fucking name. I apologise. But there was a skateboarding level as well, which was fun because you could spend like an hour just doing skateboard tricks. The skateboarding mechanics in Spyro were never greatly sophisticated, so don't you worry about it too much. Eventually, I went and bought the actual full game and played the full game. I had fun, and then I went backwards and played 2 and 1 as well. But we'll get to that when we get to it. So yes, let's dive straight in. Let's talk about Spyro the Dragon. Spyro the Dragon is the first Spyro game, and the plot is dead simple. Well, I say it's dead simple. It's a simple premise, but played in a very stupid way, as it were. The game opens up throwing you into a cutscene where a reporter is interviewing a dragon for some reason or another, and eventually they bring up Ganasty Gnorc, who is actually Nasty Gnorc, but, you know, it's got G's in it, so why would you not say it like that? And another dragon takes over and talks mad shit about Nasty, and for some reason Nasty is either watching this live interview somehow, or can just telepathically hear what's going on. I think they show him as watching it on TV in the Reignited edition, and yeah, he gets pissed off, casts a magical spell that transforms all the dragons into stone. This spell, I don't know if it's the same spell or a different one, but they make a point of saying that Nasty Gnorc has developed a magical spell that can turn gemstones into warriors for his army. So that's pretty much the explanation for why enemies drop gems in this game. Which, fair enough, simple enough. But basically, because Spyro is so small, or so nimble, depending on how you look at it, the spell just doesn't target him or misses him, and he's the only dragon who is not in fact turned to stone. So there we go. Therefore, he is our protagonist, and we control him, and off on an adventure he goes. Interesting to note here, in the Reignited, Spyro is voiced by Tom Kenny, straight up, but in the original game, Spyro was voiced by Carlos Alazraqui. I think I'm pronouncing that completely incorrectly. I don't actually personally know him because I'm not American, and we don't have Taco Bell over here in the UK, but apparently he voiced the Taco Bell Chihuahua. So yeah, from the second game onwards, he's pretty much voiced by Tom Kenny, and if you recognise that name, congratulations, you watched SpongeBob and were awesome. Now, Spyro the Dragon is a pretty simple game, but it does set up a few core features that pretty much are true throughout the entire series. First things first, you press square to charge, you press circle to breathe fire, you press jump twice to glide, which is X. In the first game, when you press triangle at the end of a glide, you just dead stop in the air and fall to the ground, which is a pain in the dick if you played 2 or 3 beforehand, because in 2 or 3, pressing triangle does a little hover at the end of your glide, which gives you just that little bit of extra oomph to get to the end of a jump. So yes, and unlike some other things they added in Reignited, they did not retroactively add that to 1, because 1 was designed without that, so it would probably completely null and void a lot of jump and glide puzzles in 1 if you could get the little hover. Last but not least, they also have Sparks as your health meter. Sparks is with you throughout every single game, and his main function is to serve as a guide to how many hits you can take. He also collects gems that are slightly further away from the model. This is a bit more useful in the early game where models were not exactly precise, so if you just walked near a gem, you'd pick it up instead of having to walk pixel perfect over it. He also has a gem radar in later games. You press a button and he points to gems you may have missed, which doesn't sound useful, but you will be surprised the amount of times a green gem can be hard to see when it's nestled amongst the grass. Let me tell you that. Spyro the Dragon does a fun little thing. It starts in the Dragon homeworlds, which the future 2 games, we don't actually come back here, so this is actually the home of all dragons, including Spyro. We can actually glean a bit of lore here, which Spyro's not filled with a great amount of lore. You can there's no codex or anything. You can just kind of glean things from things characters say. It's not the main point of the game, so it's not too heavy, and what I say here is far from fucking gospel, okay? So we've got the 6 hub worlds in Spyro 1. We've got Artisans, which is a nice safe little hub zone. It's the very first area you are in the game. Nothing here can hurt you except a little patch of water off to the side, and even then it's only if you jump into it. It's a nice little tutorial area. All the dragons here, all they do is give you advice on how to play the game. I should also mention the name of the zones is the name of the dragons that live there, so it's kind of like a weird caste system. First world's called Artisans, so artisanal dragons, people who create things, live here. The next world is Peacekeepers, so you've got dragons that keep the peace. Peacekeepers is very different to the Artisans homeworld. Artisans has nothing that can kill you. Peacekeepers has a lot that can kill you. It's also not a lush green environment. It's a desert and it's harsh. And a lot of the Norks here look like old French and British generals from like the Napoleonic Wars. It's a very interesting theme to go for. I suspect they only went for it because the colours would pop out, as it were, on PS1. Obviously, it doesn't matter so much on PS5 or PS4 because graphics improve with time. Who fucking knew? The next homeworld is Magic Crafters. No prizes for guessing what the dragons here do. They make magic. They craft things from magic, etc., etc. All these hub worlds are very small, you'll notice, especially compared to the next 2 games. But this is also the first entry in the series, so everything is scaled a lot more down to what it will become. When you come here, it's very sort of mountainous looking, so much so that the peaks are all icy, and there's a lot of magical fuckery going on. A lot of the enemies will influence the geography by making it rise and fall in random places. Some areas are just straight up blocked off without killing the wizard first. That's fucking with it. Either you can sort of loop around and flame them from the back, or if you're super fast with a charge, you can shoot straight through. Interesting to note, this is also the first appearance of the supercharged pads or supercharged ramps, because I think they're exclusively ramps in 1, but I might be misremembering. If you charge on these, you'll go super fast. It lets you charge through solid metal crates you can't normally break. It also helps you jump quite a bit further, and it introduces the annoying as fuck jump puzzles in Spyro 1. That's that. Next up is Beast Makers. Dragons make beasts. Don't know how that works, but hey ho diddly do. This one is a really wicked, gnarly looking swamp. It's very unwelcoming. Combined with the swamp and the amount of enemies you've got, you've also got weird metal floors in random places which Norks will electrify. Literally the ground you walk on is a hazard, which is not fun. Last but not least of the actual dragon homeworlds, we have Dreamweavers. These dragons live high above the clouds in a weird castle that somehow floats above them. That's some D&D shit right there. Yes, the dragons happens here, weave dreams, it's very odd. You've got some really interesting enemy designs here, interesting gimmicks. You've got some weird gnome things with clocks. You hit them, and when you hit them, they turn into the alarm clock, they tick down, and once they stop and they become human, or well, I say human, mobile again, the thing they were doing before continues to happen. So you've got to hit one, stand on a platform you can now reach, wait for them to unfreeze, and then you ride the platform up. Stuff like that. You've also got weird Pepe Le Pew looking motherfuckers who are tiny and easy to kill, unless they get shot by the big Maggie cannon, which will make them giant, in which case you've got to breathe fire on them, which isn't as easy as you think, because some of them wear armor, and are therefore indestructible when they're large. Quite annoying. But yeah, that's in the very center of the level, and you kind of have to manipulate it a bit if you mistimed things and left things big when you shouldn't have. The actual last world in the game is just called Nasty's World. It's not really a hub world, it's just a circle with a single dragon on it, which will be replaced by another dragon later on for some reason. And there's 4 gates. You got 2 regular worlds, you got Nasty's actual boss fight, and you got the super bonus level at the end of the game. So in general, each homeworld has the same pattern. There's 3 levels, well, 3 regular levels I should say, that you play through. There's a boss level, and there's a flight stage. I call them flight stages because you have to fly through them. It's basically the time trials from the next 2 games is what a flight level is. So yeah, in 3 they add a race feature to these levels as well, so it kind of gets more elaborate, but not that much more, let's be honest. Interesting to note, in Spyro 1, all the boss stages are completely optional except for Nasty Nork, at least if you just want to beat the game. If you want 100%, obviously they're not optional. The bosses in Spyro 1 are ludicrously simple. They're all the same general idea. You've got a platform of some sort or an enclosed space. You hit the boss once, they run into the next enclosed space or platform. You do it again, and then you do it a 3rd time, and they die, and they give you a bunch of gems. That's it. They don't even have particularly interesting attack patterns. I think the most distinct is probably the robot, but even then, that's just because you got to do a weird thing where you charge non-electrified posts. You know, dead simple, but it's also the first game, so it's forgivable, and, you know, they're skippable. They didn't put much thought in them. You don't need to do them if you just want to beat the game. When I say they're all dead simple, I do actually include Nasty Nork, because Nasty Nork's final stage is, there's thieves in the game that have dragon eggs, that all they do is run away from you. They can't hurt you. You chase one down, you get a key. Then another one spawns. You chase that one, and you get another key. You can now access Nasty Nork. What do you do to Nasty Nork? You chase him through a stage. That's it. Not complex, not difficult. If you've beaten every stage in the game, or, you know, even just enough to unlock Nasty's world, you've probably got the skill set to beat Nasty without even breaking a sweat. Oh yes, before I forget, in order to transition between worlds, you need to meet someone called the Balloonist. What he requires from you to progress varies between stages, but I know it starts off as you need 10 dragons. 10 dragons, and you can move on to the next set of homeworlds. Then it's X amount of gems, then it's dragon eggs, and then it's dragons again. So one of the flaws of Spyro the Dragon is there's no clear collectible that you need to collect throughout the game. It's just collect everything. You're gonna need everything at some point. Spyro the 1 is a real collectathon, as it were. Spyro the 1. But yes, if you collect everything in the game, you unlock the very final world, which I think is called Nasty's Loop. It's basically a victory lap. You can, in theory, die in this because the floor is lava, quite literally, but that's the only threat in the whole thing. It's just collect all the rest of the gems, that's it. I believe you get an additional cutscene if you do, and it's just Spyro chilling out with sunglasses on, being like, yeah, I'm fucking cool, deal with it. That's it, that's all you get. You also get the pride knowing that you beat the game 100%. Yes, yes, yes. So that is Spyro the Dragon in a nutshell, guys. We are going to move on to Spyro 2, but first, interesting to note, I assume it's because Insomniac Games did both franchises, but both Spyro and Crash had this fun thing where usually there was a code you could enter on the title screen. For Spyro the Dragon, if you entered a certain cheat code, then you could get a playable demo of Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, which, you know, was the, funny enough, was the last good mainline Crash Bandicoot game. In my opinion, I can be wrong, it's fine. But yeah, that was a cool thing they used to do, but it's also because, bear in mind, they make money if you buy the other game as well, so makes sense. Onwards to the second game in the trilogy. The next game is called Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage. Or at least it is to most people, but here in the UK and the rest of Europe, it was called Gateway to Glimmer. Why was it called Gateway to Glimmer? I've got no fucking clue. I literally googled this last night while prepping this script for myself, and the only answers I've got are speculative at best. I think the most viable answer is basically marketing. Essentially, the speculation goes that Americans preferred fighting games and beat 'em ups, so Ripto's Rage sounds kind of like that, so that's what we'll call it there. Whereas Europeans and the Japanese liked fantasy games, and Gateway to Glimmer sounds very fantastical. That's the only thing I've been able to find online, and that's not even people in the company saying that, that's just people online, so take it with a huge grain of salt. That's all I could find. Either way, doesn't matter so much, because the title of the game still makes sense, because the very first level of the game is Glimmer. You start the game in Glimmer. The world, not the princess, so it does make a degree of sense at the very least. Although, why the fuck you'd name the entire game after the first world? Baffling. Whatever. This time around, the game has a few interesting additions. First things first, each world you enter has a mini story. Every time you enter a new world, you get a small little cutscene, like usually not even a minute long, just sort of setting up what's going on in the world. Like, in one of the first levels, there's a Yeti that's moved in to a monastery and is stopping people from going in there, so that's how you deal with that. And at the end of the level, you get a little cutscene to see how the world has changed now you've dealt with the problems. So for that very same one, I think people are literally pointing and laughing at the Yeti. I can't remember, it's been a while. Let's pick a better example. Okay, like at the end of Shady Oasis, not Shady Oasis, there's a level where you meet Hansel and Gretel, and at the end of it, they do their Kung Fu Matrix shit with glowing eyes. That's the end of that story. You help them complete their spy mission. There we go. Another change is each world has a series of NPCs unique to it. So in the previous game, the only NPCs you interacted with were fellow dragons, and they played the same short message on loop whenever you activated it. And to be fair, you don't get exactly more dialogue from the NPCs, but they are there all the time. For example, in the first world, everyone's a mouse. You talk to the first one, and it's like, oh, this is Glimmer, we've got to blah, 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 blah. Yeah? It's just nice. It makes the world feel more lived in than just talking to random dragons that you free. The most important change they did for Spyro 2 was the objectives have changed. Yes, before the Balloonist would set a seemingly random task, which basically equated to, hey, collect everything, fucko. So, change from that to, at the beginning of the game, it's stated very clearly, you need to collect all the talismans to progress. And for the second world, you also have to collect all of the talismans. In the third world, it changes up because you've collected all the talismans in the known world. Yes. Instead, you have to collect orbs in order to power the professor's machine, or gateway. I forget, it's been a while. So, yeah, but at the same time, if you open up your atlas at any time, you notice that every world has a talisman to collect, and a list of mysterious orbs. So, you know, you should probably be trying to collect these orbs anyway, because they're clearly important, but at the outset, it's not important, but it becomes important. Take a shot every time I say important. Important. There we go. The next change they did was, in order to gate lock certain things, Spyro can now unlock abilities by paying a certain NPC, which we'll get to in a bit. For example, you can learn the ability to swim. Now, you can already swim in this game from the get-go, but by swimming here, they mean dive down under the water and collect things under there. You can also learn to climb ladders, and you can learn to head bash. Those are the 3 skills you get, and they carry over to the next game, which is great continuality. I love it when you learn skills in a game, and in the sequel, you just have them unlocked at the beginning. That's great fucking continuality. Love it. So rarely happens. What these serve to do is they gate lock certain content. So, for example, you can only access like 2 or 3 world gates before unlocking the ability to dive in the first realm, and likewise there's an orb and some gems in the hub world after climbing a ladder, so you have to come back after learning the ability to climb in the next hub world. So that's another thing it does as well, is it encourages you to play levels and come back. So there'll be a ladder in a level and you'll be like, cool, I can't fucking do this yet, so might as well rush this stage and come back and finish it later. Yes, last but not least is head bash. Head bash is the least useful skill because it doesn't actually lock progression, because you don't unlock it until the final world, but what it does is it locks the ability to gain certain orbs. So when you find out your final task is to get all the orbs, it's like, oh cool, I need to go do that mini game, but I need the head bash first. So yeah, it's all to encourage you to return to prior levels I should say. They've also added up power-up gates. Every level pretty much has at least one. Sometimes the power is something as simple as just a spring to let you get to higher up. Sometimes it's super flame because there's enemies you can't beat otherwise. All of these power-up gates have the same thing in common, and that is to activate them you have to kill X amount of enemies in the zone. And I think this was to compensate for the fact that enemies don't actually drop gems in this game. They only drop their spirits, which power up these power-up gates, which is fucked up when you think about it, but yeah. And of course, yes, most importantly, hovering is now officially added. So in the prior game, if you press triangle at any point in a glide, you just dead-ass stop in the air and drop to the ground. Now it does a little hover, and it's actually mandatory to get 100% of the gems and the collectibles because things are just out of reach without that little hover ability. Apparently there's also the ability to use the gem raider on this game, but I never used it because I didn't know it existed. I know it exists in the Reignited edition because all the games retroactively get that anyway, so I just assumed that was a thing for 2. But yeah, apparently you could do do it in original baseline too. I never did because I didn't know it was a thing. But hey ho. Okay, another thing the game did was introduce some key NPCs that are basically reoccurring characters. First things first, we've got Allura the Thorne. She is one of the first 3 characters you meet in the game. She gives you a guidebook, which is the press select button, you bring up the guidebook, and it tells you what you still got to collect, basically. Tracks the gems, the orbs, and the talismans in each world, so you can keep track of what you've got and what you've yet to get. She is also a great little NPC who will give you just generic advice and tutorials in the hub world at the beginning. She is also got a big upgrade in Reignited, and is now obviously fucking furry bait. So, hey, if you're into furryism, congrats, you got a new one to add to your collection, I guess. Next up is Hunter, the cheater. He has a bow for some bloody reason. To be honest, Hunter is a bit of a dick, but he does end up being Spyro's quote-unquote best friend. He does help you on your quest quite a bit, but usually he collects the resource you're going to find, so in this game it's orbs, and then it's like, I want to play a game with you. You beat me, I'll give you this orb. And it's like, okay, we're meant to be working to the same goal, you dickhead. Can you not just give it to me? It's like, no, you got to beat me. Okay, why are we friends again? The next character is actually a dickhead. It's Moneybags. Yes. Essentially, with the getting rid of the Balloonist and making your new main collectible the orbs and the talismans, gems were functionally useless now. But don't worry, we introduced this character who loves gems. So you pay this dude X amount of gems. He usually has roadblocks for you that you can pay to get rid of. And he's also the person who sells you the upgrade abilities. So if you want to learn how to dive, climb ladders, or head bash, you gotta pay him that sweet hard-earned money, which you find lying on the ground everywhere. And last but not least, we've got the Professor. He is a mole, I think. He's got super thick glasses, so I assume he's some sort of creature that is functionally blind. He is also definitely voiced by Tom Kenny. Even back in the original Spyro days, his voice was a dead ringer for SpongeBob. Spyro doesn't really sound like Tom Kenny, but when you hear the Professor talk, you're like, that's fucking SpongeBob. The Professor's job is basically creating shit, so usually he's the reason why you can navigate certain obstacles, and sometimes the reason you have obstacles in the first place, because his invention's fucked up. It's kind of the pros and cons of science, I suppose. Now, while that was the NPCs they've added into the world, it's also important to note that this game introduces Ripto. He is the antagonist for the game, and pretty much in every other Spyro game or feature going forward, Ripto is the canonical big bad. If you've got a picture of antagonists and protagonists, next to Spyro, you'll probably see Ripto. When they did the Crash and Spyro crossovers on the GBA, Ripto was the bad guy for the Spyro side, because he's so recognisable at this point. But yes, onto the plot. After the end of the first game, Spyro has the desire to go on a much-needed vacation, or holiday if you're a Brit like I, and where does he want to vacation to? The Dragon Shores. So, of course, he steps through a portal, as any good self-respecting dragon would do, and instead of Dragon Shores, he ends up in Glimmer. He is introduced to Allura, the Professor, and Hunter, and they explain that, oh shit, Ripto's here and has taken over the world, but he hates dragons, and we need a dragon. You're a dragon. Help us kill the thing, you dragon. So, yeah, Spyro kind of agrees, because he hasn't got much of a choice, but also, Spyro's a good guy. He probably would have come back after his holiday to help if he could. Another noticeable big change this game around is, going forward, hub worlds no longer have actual enemies. Yes, the only thing populating the worlds are friendly NPCs and fodder animals. So whenever you return to a hub zone, you know for a fact that you're perfectly safe. So if you finish the level and you've got 0 hits left and Sparks is gone, don't worry, you can just run about the home world without getting murdered unless you jump off a cliff and refill your health bar at your leisure. They usually have clumps of entire fodder animals just for refilling your health bar if need be. Going forward, we tend to see a more traditional naming convention for each homeworld. For example, in this game, each of the homeworlds is named after a season. We've got Summer Forest, Autumn Plains, and the Winter Tundra. There's also Dragon Shores, but it's kind of not really a hub world. It straddles that fine line between hub world and bonus level, you know what I mean? But we'll get there when we get there. The flow changes up quite a bit this time, in that there's a very definite set of rules. There's between 4 to 6 worlds. There's 6 worlds in the first 2 levels and 4 in the last one, and there's also at least one flight world, but the flight worlds are kind of weird in this one. You do the time trial to get all your gems, and you can do a secret mission in each flight world in order to earn an orb. The boss fights are no longer optional, and in fact don't even get their own realms. No, now the boss fights block off future progression. So once you got all the talismans in the first world, you can approach, I think it's Gulp first, Gulp's Overlook, and you have to fight him in order to get to Autumn Plains, and then you got Crush raiding at the end of Autumn Plains to get to Winter Tundra. These boss fights will take longer because they've got a lot more HP, and they're a bit more unforgiving than the prior game. But that's what I think what everyone kind of wanted. Important to note that these 2 bosses are they're either so generic or iconic that their movesets return in future Spyro games, because, you know, here's Shockwave, here's Crusher, it's, you know, they're not exactly over-the-top mechanics, you know, guys? That's the general flow. The final boss of the game is, of course, Ripto, who has two distinct phases, one where you're normal, the other where you gotta fly around the arena and fuck him up. It's a bit difficult, and I wouldn't be surprised if some people fumble a couple of times on their first attempt. But yeah, once you beat Ripto, you can visit Dragon Shores. It's a holiday hotspot, and it's filled with literally just dumb mini-games. You've got a roller coaster where you've got to clear every single target. You've got 3 different tracks that you go on. Each one gives you a token. I forget what the tokens are for, but I think unlocks films in the cinema, maybe. You've got a shooting gallery, which, self-explanatory. You've got a dunk tank, where you can dunk different enemies, or different big enemies in the game, or just not nice people. Moneybags doesn't appear, alas. And last but not least, there's a Tunnel of Love, which has a, you know, you go in solo and you come out with a random partner. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, who knows. But yeah, you get a token just for playing, and all of these can be repeated as many times as you want, but you only get tokens X amount of times. What's more, if you get 100% completion, you get to unlock the Super Flame ability permanently. Now, this is kind of a pointless reward in the original game, because if you 100% beat the game, you're done. There's nothing else for you to do. If you do this in the Reignited Edition and start a new save slot for Spyro 2, then it carries over for some reason. So if you want to replay Spyro 2 but with Super Flame, that's how you can do it. Unlike the previous game, there is no playable demo at the beginning with a cheat code, likely because there was no Crash game coming out anytime soon. But yes, that was Spyro 2, guys. Now then, on to my favourite part of the episode that I've been looking forward to. We get to talk about Spyro Year of the Dragon, my personal favourite Spyro game. Now, why is this game called Spyro Year of the Dragon? I will tell you, faithful listeners. It's called Year of the Dragon because every 12 years, that's when new dragons are born. Incidentally, the game also came out in the year 2000, which was the actual Year of the Dragon. So, you know, it was probably more influenced than that by any actual lore. Again, I need to stress, Spyro doesn't really have lore. There's lore. Anything that has story has lore, but they don't go in depth with it because it's a silly little platformer. They imply certain things go on in the grand universe, but they never outright state it, so anything is guesswork at best. Before we dive into the plot, let's talk about the new characters. Each hub world has a rebel world, and these rebel worlds have a freedom fighter representing them, basically, and these characters are guest characters. You can control them in certain points in the game, including the entirety of their original homeworlds. First things first, we've got Sheila. She is a kangaroo. She jumps real high and kicks real hard. That's it, because she's a kangaroo. She has got the most use out of all of the guest characters. In the original game, she was literally just a kangaroo, but in the reignited version of the game, she got a makeover that turns her into proper furry bait. Yes, if you don't know what that is, feel free to Google it, but I recommend against it. You know what I mean? They knew what they were doing when they upgraded that character. They were like, we could just go with a normal kangaroo again, or, hear me out, let's make her attractive to that 1% of people. I'm kidding, I'm pretty sure there's more than 1% of the world are furries nowadays. But yes, we've got Sergeant Bird, a penguin who can fly with his jetpack type thing. He has guns. Well, they're not guns, they're rockets attached. He's kind of like a secret agent, because he's in the army, he's got this secret tech, and he's even called James Bird. By the way, Bird is spelled B-Y-R-D, so it's not as dumb as you think. He also has a vaguely British accent, but not quite, so do what you will with that. Although he does have a fun bit where when he's released, he shows off his rocket launchers, and Spyro's like, why didn't you just use those to break out? He's like, oh, I was conserving ammo for this, and then shoots the shit out of Moneybags. Next up, we have Bentley the Yeti. He is quite the linguist. In fact, he goes out of his way to use a lot of fancy words when he berates Moneybags, calling him a bunch of lengthy words, but he calls him an ursine instead of a bear, because fuck you. He's a big old brute in appearance, and in fact in the way he controls, he has a big old ice club. He's a real beefy motherfucker. He is more intelligent than you are led to believe. He takes every opportunity he can to use verbose language to show off his intelligence, and quite frankly, if you've got it, I get it, especially if one look at you implies fug. So, you know. Last but not least, we have Agent 9, who is a batshit insane monkey with a laser blaster. Yes, that is correct, I'm not exaggerating. He is probably the least fun character to control in Spyro 3, but his insane ramblings made him endearing as fuck to me when I was a child. It's weird, because when he's in first person mode, I actually quite like how he controls quite a lot, and when you see certain developers were influenced by Doom, that's definitely the part of the game that was influenced by it. Obviously, it's nowhere near as complex as Doom. I'm not saying Doom's complex, but if you compare the two, it's like comparing apples to oranges. He's the character you like as a kid because he rambles like a madman. But yes, those are the guest characters. They have quite important parts to play. In fact, without them, it is feasible that you could not beat any of the boss fights. Without Sheila, you can't do any real material damage to Buzz. Without Sergeant Bird, you get no ammo for that fight. Without Bentley, you don't get any ammo for that fight. And without Agent 9, you don't get the laser cannons dropped from the ceiling, so you can't do damage to the Sorceress. All of these bosses, by the way, are immune to normal Dragon Breath fire, so the Sorceress actually gets some credit there because she did invent foes that Spyro couldn't damage without assistance. It's rare you find intelligent villains in this type of game. But yes, onto the plot. The dragons are all sound asleep, and the new generic foe, the Rhinox, sneak out from holes to steal all the dragon eggs. Bianca is leading them, another furry bait character, this time a bunny rabbit, so even more obvious, and she trips over Hunter, and it sort of raises the alarm, and they have to rush back down the holes. But because they got caught and they knew that the eggs had been stolen, they could instantly rally themselves into action. The fairies, led by Zoe, who is the little fairy that gives you a zap everywhere in the game as your checkpoint, give chase, but lo and behold, they can't really even lift the eggs, let alone bring them back through the holes. But fortunately, Spyro is still a little dragon, and he can head down the holes into the Forgotten Realms and retrieve said dragon eggs for the dragons to survive and prosper. Hunter can also join him, but he gets stuck the first time he attempts to follow because he's an idiot. The game, as I said, is set in the Forgotten Realms, a set of worlds on essentially the opposite side of the planet from the Dragon Realm, and it's so far removed from the dragons, it's starting to lose its magic, a magic that can only return with dragons returning, which, by the way, is how the Sorceress tricks poor innocent Bianca into working for her. Sorceress leads Bianca to believe that by having the dragons be born on this side of the planet, then magic will return in full force and they can continue their magical ways. In reality, she wants to pluck the baby dragon rings from their back and create some kind of potion. I believe it's implied to be for either immortality or beauty, or both. This time the hub worlds have no enemies again, and in fact I don't think there's any way to damage yourself in these hub worlds. I think the very last one has a lot of places where you can fall off and lose a life. This time the theme is times of the day, which is a very weird theme to have, but hey ho. We've got Sunrise Spring, Midday Garden, Evening Lake, and finally Midnight Mountain. Each homeworld has 6 levels, 1 boss level and 1 bonus level. One of those 6 levels is always going to be a rebel world, as it were, where you unlock a new character. The boss isn't really a level, it's much like number 2, where to progress to the next world you have to beat a boss fight. And the bonus level is self-explanatory. I did mention earlier on, this time round it's the time trial. You've also got the race against X Racer, and there's always a secret egg you can earn by doing a hunter-themed mission. As well as all this, Sparks also gets his own levels. Yes, they're a top-down shooter type level where Sparks shoots various insects, like there's bugs, there's crawdads, there's crawdads, there's spiders, there's crawdads, there's starfish. I can't remember the theme for the last one. I think the last one is just mechanized robots. But yeah, each time you beat these levels, Sparks gets an upgrade. Most importantly, in the original game, in order to unlock the gem radar, you had to do the 2nd level, I think. You really want that upgrade. It really makes 100% completion a lot easier. The other upgrades you can get are Sparks can get gems from further away, Sparks can open containers for you, and last but not least, Sparks gets an extra hit, but by the time you get that, you've probably beaten most of the game anyway. The villain, as I said, is the Sorceress. She's a generically evil queen who wants to kill the baby dragons for a spell, and she does Bianca real dirty. Bianca doesn't want to be a part of this, but she doesn't know that's what the plan is until the very last hub world, so she does eventually get a heel face turn. Bianca becomes a goodie, which is good, because it's arguable that, again, you probably wouldn't beat the Sorceress if Bianca didn't have that sudden switch. Now, after beating the Sorceress and getting 100% completion, you get to go to the super bonus round. Yep, that's what they named that realm. This world is a bit of a weird one in that it's got no enemies. Well, it kind of does. It kind of does, but it doesn't. It's weird. The super bonus round isn't very difficult. It involves catching a load of thieves. You've got a race against Yetis on superpowered sleds. You do a manta ray thing with Hunter. All it is getting a bunch of gems. Once you've got all the gems, you have to fight the Sorceress again because she terminated out. And once you beat the Sorceress, you get the egg from her staff, and lo and behold this last final egg number 150, hatches into 2 baby dragons, yin and yang. It's a cool little moment, and much like 2, you don't get an extra cutscene for this 100% bonus, but you do get to feel good. But yes, before I wrap up our talk on Spyro Year of the Dragon, it's important to note that, once again, there is a demo at the beginning of the game if you enter a cheat code, this time for Crash Bash, a fun party game I love the shit out of. I still have the disc for this game in case I ever want to play it. It was that fun. Used to play it with my brother a lot. Sadly, that's the end of Spyro Year of the Dragon and the end of the good Spyro Spyro games, at least in my opinion. Yes, Insomniac moved on to work on Ratchet and Clank, and I think they still do focus on that franchise. I think Spyro is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. Sony and PlayStation in particular had this weird thing where they wanted a mascot character like Mario or Sonic, but they never fully committed. It's not surprising that if someone says PlayStation, you think of a dozen different characters to represent the console. Usually it's either Crash, Spyro, or shit, even Sly Cooper. Ratchet and Clank, like, they're still going strong. Also doesn't matter now, because, like, yeah, Nintendo's still going fairly strong and they've still got Mario as their icon, but Xbox doesn't have one, Sony doesn't have one. But yeah, nothing's going to tarnish the memory of those games. Real talk, it was a fairly regular occurrence that once a year I would just replay the entire trilogy. Those games are that near and dear to my heart. It might be rose-coloured goggles, not even going to lie. If it makes you feel the good tingles, it's not a bad thing. They're also not very long games. Like, if you've played the game once before, I'd be surprised if it takes you more than 8 hours to beat a game 100%. But yes, it's going to be kind of weird doing this next part solo, but I suppose we need to do our usual rundown. So, first things first, favourite moment. My favourite moment was beating Spyro 3 100% for the first time. I was fairly young, so it was quite a magical moment. I didn't usually play games to 100% completion. It would be like beat the story and you're done. So yeah, that was probably my highest point. Weakest link, the franchise falling to shit. Yes, Spyro is one of those games, much like Crash, that did not do the transition to PlayStation 2 very well, and I'd argue probably hasn't really even gotten close to its glory day, you know? Maybe some people like Skylanders, I don't know. I was never going to buy a game which required you to buy lots of figures in order to enjoy the entire experience. The Game Boy crossover game with Crash was an interesting concept, but it wasn't a good fun game, so yeah. Last but not least, MVP, Spyro, duh. He's the adorable little dragon. He talks mad shit for someone who's so small, but he can back it up. In reality, though, like, he's the main character. It's who you control. It'd be weird to not grow some sort of attachment to the little purr. To the little purple scaly bro. He's good, people. So yeah, MVP Spyro. I would love to have more games in the franchise, but at this point, there's been more bad Spyro games than good Spyro games, so I can understand the hesitancy. But Crash got a new game, so there's always hope. So yes, that's the end of our nonsense retrospective today. As I said, hopefully Rick will be back with us next week and we can plow on as normal. But for now, if you've made it this far, you are my favourite person. I do appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, please give us a like, comment, subscribe down below. Although we really want comments, we want to know what you think. And if you're listening via one of our Audible platforms, then please feel free to send us an email at nonsensereviewuk@gmail.com. Once again, that is nonsensereviewuk@gmail.com. We are happy to receive any sort of feedback or even requests for future episodes. We're open to anything. So yeah, that's it from me now, guys. So keep yourself safe and keep yourselves happy. See you again next time. Toodles!